When you talk about antitrust laws, do you include laws or regulations of the government that lead to less competition? For instance, the government for years regulated airlines in this country, and I think it's since the CAB was founded there wasn't another airline in the business of transporting passengers. Is that, in a sense, an antitrust law?
No, that's an anti-competition law.
Right. Are those
and
kind of
almost
things?
all regulation is anti-competition, and the movement to deregulate is pro-competitive. The real issue there, though, is once we deregulate, should we then apply the antitrust laws to the deregulated industries? And almost all the antitrust advocates say, yes, now we have to apply the antitrust laws to the deregulated air carriers. I say no. I say no, because a free market is precisely that, a market that is free of intervention. And once you remove the regulation, the market will be competitive, as long as there's the possibility of open entry, and there's been plenty of entry, of course, into the air carrier business. So I would not apply the antitrust laws to the air carriers.
Congressman Paul, what do you think the chances are that Congress is going to repeal antitrust laws?
The chances of us getting a vote on something like that is essentially nil, and if it did come up, I imagine there'd be 1% of us who would endorse the idea of the free market, even with application to the antitrust. So I would say the understanding is practically absent here, unfortunately. Yet, hopefully, I think the trend is in our direction that more and more understand this, and maybe another 10 years that'll be completely different. I certainly hope so. Because out of a practical need. I mean, we have monetary problems and we have fiscal problems, but we have competition problems too. And I think along this line about competition and maximizing, and frequently is discussed when you talk about antitrust laws, and that has to do with the tariffs. It seems like big business was protected, and they did have a large portion of the market back in the latter part of the 19th century, but there were also people who believed in the tariffs. That's why they were big frequently. So I don't know whether we can isolate this out here and just say it's antitrust. For full competition, full market, we have to address the antitrust, we have to address the regulations that protect certain companies, but then the tariff issue too. And yet, boy, the sentiment here, not only is the sentiment strongly opposed to any repeal of antitrust, it is sure protectionist lately, and this is discouraging. It's, you know, because we've ruined the international trade, mainly because I think we've ruined international currencies and financing. Therefore, we're resorting to tariffs, and I see this as a bad sign.
In 1890, the two issues in the Congress were the tariff and the antitrust laws, and it's argued that the Republicans supported the antitrust law because they didn't want to go on record as being the pro-tariff party, the pro-monopoly party. They favored tariffs, and everyone knew tariffs created monopolies, or at least protected monopolies, and it was the chairman of the U.S. Sugar Company who said the tariff is the mother of the trust. Mr. Havemeyer in 1893 said that. So the Republicans took a position in 1890 that they would favor the Sherman Act because they thought that would cover them with their constituency, because their constituency would believe that they were against the trust.
A typical
because they favored the Sherman Act.
An example of how one intervention leads to another one or two more government interventions.
Precisely.
Well, if antitrust laws are anti-consumer, why aren't they going to be repealed? Is it that congressmen haven't got the message? Do most people in the economics profession hold your view?
15 years ago, if you had tried to find one political person who would have said, we can repeal airlines regulation, you couldn't find it. It takes time before the mood is right and the politics is right to repeal legislation. And yet it was 15 years ago, I believe, that a professor by the name of Levine wrote the first important article that was published in the Journal of Law and Economics that said we can deregulate the airlines industry and rates will go down. This is pro-consumer. Up until that point, everyone believed that regulation was pro-consumer. So I think it is a slow process. Ideas take time to filter down through.
Has that been your experience?
You know, I think this is certainly the case, but what I find frustrating is that the members here respond to a technical argument, say they could be convinced of deregulation for airlines and then they will support it, but those same individuals might be the strongest for regulation of, say, the price of oil and gas. They don't approach things with a basic principle and saying, you know, freedom is the best, the market is the best way to deliver goods and services. They approach it in a very pragmatic way. Not that we should deny their support when it comes, but to me it would be so much easier if we could convince them of basic principles and then this all falls into place. But I guess we take whatever we can get piecemeal.
I don't want to wait 100 years to get the antitrust laws repealed.
Yeah, well, good.
So I'll take what I can get.
Right.
Is it naive to think that in the absence of antitrust laws, we'd have this perfect competition that the economists talk about, that we wouldn't have collusion at the expense of the consumer?
Well, I think there's a couple of mistakes in that question. The first is, I think it's naive to believe that antitrust works in the interest of the consumer and is pro-competitive. The second thing is, I don't believe in perfect competition. And I think it is naive to believe that the repeal of the antitrust laws would produce perfect competition. I'm talking about an openly competitive market, and that is a market where the government does not restrict production or exchange, where there are no tariffs, no quotas, no entry restrictions. I would remove the antitrust laws also, and then you get what I call an openly competitive market, not a perfectly competitive market. That's a technical model that the economist has built and has no practical usefulness as far as I'm concerned. So I don't think we can achieve that. I don't think that would be in the interest of the consumer, frankly. But an openly competitive market, that is achievable. How to achieve it? Simply remove the restrictions on entry into the market.
You know, I think when people hear us talk, they might be thinking about steel and aluminum and different things, but what about utilities? Most people assume, you know, just in a blanket fashion, that utilities must be run by the government or regulated by governments. Do you think it's real practical to start talking about having several electric companies or allowing free?
There are many markets that are served by more than one electric
company. But this is generally not known. I do know that there are some cities now that do have a couple electric companies present, but I think it's breaking into this this attitude, which is sort of fixed in people's mind, that you can't have competition even in the area of utilities.
Well, there's been a lot of work done by economists in this area, and what we've seen is that rapidly changing technology is obsoleting all our ideas about regulating and about natural monopoly and about the whole utility notion. I mean, we're deregulating in telecommunications, which is a utility area. Why? Because we can't intelligently, nor should we, try to regulate conduct and performance and entry. It's simply impossible. So again, for good practical reasons, although not philosophical reasons, for good practical reasons, the government is drawing back in telecommunications. So certainly, I don't think any of these areas are naturally monopolistic. They are monopolistic only because the government impedes entry. In Connecticut, for example, we didn't get a utility commission regulating electric rates until 1916. Now, there were many, many companies selling power in the market prior to 1916, competitively. How did we get regulation? We got regulation because the leading power companies, seeing rates decline dramatically and profits deteriorate dramatically, demanded regulation, and that's where the Regulatory Commission came from. And Greg Jarrell has written an article in the Journal of Law and Economics on the origin of regulation in the electric utility industry, and this is what he finds, that the industry itself, not the consumers, demanded electric rate regulation.
Because it keeps out their competition.
Because it keeps out competition, exactly.
Well, what's happening now with the phone industry? And we hear about the breakup of AT&T, which for years has had a virtual monopoly, it seems, over phone service. And the argument has been we can't have 5 or 6 telephone companies putting up lines on the street and competing. But with the advances in technology, it seems that now we can have some competition.
Remember, competition means an open market. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to have 2 or 30 companies competing directly against each other. It may be infeasible to have 5 telephone companies serving the same street. It depends on what consumers want. If consumers are willing to pay the cost of that kind of duplication, then there will be 5. Mm-hmm. Bell Telephone had a monopoly for 17 years, a government-enforced monopoly. Started way back in the 19th century, and I think it expired in 1892 or something like that. The minute those patents expired, competitors came in the market. There are 2,000 telephone companies in this country that came into the market after the Bell patents expired. Mm-hmm. Now, it was Bell, it was the American Telephone and Telegraph Company that said, we want franchised monopoly so that we can serve the consumer more efficiently. When at that precise time, consumers were being served more efficiently by newcomers who were coming into the market and competing away Bell's share. In fact, the newcomers in the telephone industry had more phones installed in the 10 years after the market was opened than Bell had installed in the first 17 years of its monopoly. So even the telephone business, or I should say precisely the telephone business, can be openly competitive. But we must remove the regulation. And we must not apply the antitrust laws to the companies once we've removed the regulations that restrict entry. That would defeat the whole purpose.